Have you ever noticed how some of the most academically gifted people can often be ill-equipped to handle social situations or take on leadership roles? Turns out there's a reason. Scientists are now saying your EQ, or emotional intelligence, is just as important as your IQ, and that a high IQ alone isn't enough to make you successful or happy in life. Emotional intelligence is supposed to help us succeed at work, build stronger relationships, achieve our goals, and even make us better athletes. Dr. Lenny Kristal is an expert on emotional intelligence and its real-world applications. He's a clinical psychologist, author, multimedia producer, and consultant to major corporations and other organizations looking to capitalize on the emotional intelligence of their team. He's also the co-founder of Cognizance and EmotionWise, and along with his team of experts, he's developed a technology that helps people understand their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to emotional intelligence. Currently, Dr. Kristal is working on a project with Stanford University's Graduate School of Business to determine the human formula for a successful and effective CEO. I want to welcome you to the broadcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good to be here.
It's funny, I was doing the research, reading up on you, and we have a coincidence, which is kind of remarkable. You went to a career advisor and they said you were destined to work in a factory. And one of my counselors in high school, I told her, I said, this is what I want to do. And she's like, Mike, great to have those high expectations, but you're going to be much better off as a carpenter. You'll never make it in this business. Right. So here we are today. So
well, that's terrific. And that's a good segue in a point, in fact, because basically that got me interested in terms of what I'm doing these days, because they told me I'm going to work in a factory. By the way, good research on me. I don't know where you got that tidbit. But nonetheless, I knew, obviously, because I wasn't very academic at school. I wasn't very interested in high school, sports, girls, music. But I knew I had it within me to go a lot further. And I realized then and there that just trying to give people questionnaires and answer questions is not the right way to go, all those years ago. And I figured there's got to be a better way. They're not tapping who I am and what my real potential is. And that really sowed the seeds, I think, of where ultimately I landed up professionally.
That's wild. And I'm fascinated with it, too. So here we are. We could be working in a factory together as carpenters, but we're here instead. Tell me about emotional intelligence. People are probably, maybe some folks scratching their heads. What is that? How would you explain it?
Well, it really comprises of three different interactive issues. First of all, you're looking at your physiological response to something. Now, the big question is, when you feel something physiologically, do you then label that and put a label on it saying, my heart's pounding, therefore I'm fearful. There's a tiger behind me, it's going to jump on me. So the physiological then interplays with the reaction that you have, and the reaction is reflected in what kind of behavior you exude. So at any one of these stages, the physiological, the reflective, and the expressive, emotion can really fall anywhere in between. So the big question philosophically, which was then tested empirically, is do we run because we're scared, or are we scared because we're running? We feel a state, and because we feel that state, our heart starts pounding. Or consequently, do we actually have our heart pounding and our sweat glands going, and therefore we feel afraid, so we start running. And that was a big issue that really vexed the field of psychology for a long time. But basically, the emotional aspect of who we are and what we are, we really do need to understand and label for ourselves what we are feeling. Because if we can't do that effectively, then you can't engage with others effectively. If I'm mislabeling what I feel, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm actually feeling fearful, and I'm a little bit scared of you, Mike, it's going to then temper the way that I respond to you. But in fact, it may not be fear at all. It might just be adrenaline flowing because I'm sitting in a television studio.
Right.
And actually, it's quite okay. But it's an interaction that's going on. And that leads me to the next thing, but I'll take a pause and see what you've got to ask me.
Well,
next.
I'm going to try and frighten you. How's that?
Yeah.
You know, let me ask you this. Let's say I'm a bright guy. I've got great grades. I just graduated from Harvard or Yale. And so it's obvious the academics is going to get me in the door for the job. Is the lack of emotional intelligence going to send me to the exits? I mean, you see where I'm going with the question.
Yes.
I may have the skills, but if I can't deal with colleagues, can that end up resulting in me perhaps failing at the job?
I think you've put your finger on the pulse here. Because by and large, what tends to happen in our society is we look at academic excellence to get us into the top schools. And we look at the GPAs and say, well, this guy's got what it takes to be a CEO. Let's fast track him and put him or her in a position that they'll rise to the top. They may rise to the top, but then what happens? If they don't have the emotional literacy or the emotional awareness that they can then go and have that effectively translated by dealing with people in the organizations, they're missing a beat completely because they're not maximizing their ability to communicate with people around them. In point of fact, some studies have argued cogently that emotional intelligence, I like to call it emotional literacy, is essential to succeed in life, in any aspect of your life, not just in the business world, but in terms of your interpersonal relationships. Mm-hmm. And particularly so in the business world, it's been an issue that's been utterly lacking in terms of discerning your potential and your success factors. Emotional literacy is probably as good as, and some studies suggest better than, academic grades or IQ in terms of predicting success.
But let me talk to you about your method of measurement. Sure. How do you go about it? How do you determine?
Right. So our methodology at Cognisys is really a combination of 4 dimensions, and I'll explain how we develop that. We look at your cognitive processing, first of all. We will give you a little working memory test. They're little interactive games that take probably 2 minutes in total. You don't know what you're being tested on. We're looking at your speed of reaction. We're looking at your decision-making process. Do you tend to take a long time to make a decision? And we can measure very accurately how you're responding to stimuli that are being thrown at you. So we have about 12 different cognitive functions that we can look at. We then look at your emotional literacy. I was very much involved with Professor Dak Keltner and a PhD student of his, Dan Cordaro at UC Berkeley, who developed this emotional intelligence test, where we took over 850 pictures of facial expressions and over 600 vocalizations. That's an important factor when actually you're looking to somebody's emotional awareness, the way that we communicate. How well do you understand vocalizations? And it's the first time that a scientifically validated test of this kind has been brought to the fore, combining faces and voices. But it's not just emotion on its own. We tie the cognitive into the emotion. We also then look at your social intelligence and your social perception. You can't really divorce any of these because they're interlinked. Take social perception, for instance. We might show you a series of 4 pictures and might say, which fast food do you like? And there may be a picture of a hamburger, Chinese takeout, whatever you're showing them. And the individual might pick a particular stimulus. I like a hamburger. And later on in the series of projections that we give them online, we might ask them, well, what do you think most people enjoy? So the person might think to themselves, most people probably enjoy fish. Now, how accurate is their choice of that stimulus? And of course, it's culture specific. But nonetheless, let's assume most people actually choose a hamburger. They like a hamburger. And I think every time, no, they like fish. Or if I'm looking at movies, everybody likes horror instead of action. Mm-hmm. My social perception is off. Yeah. That'll never come through in an interview and an assessment in any way. So we can measure precisely, in statistical terms, how far you diverge from the majority of people in a particular cohort or particular culture picking a stimulus that indicates what they like, and I'm totally off. And the more I'm off, the more skewed I am. But you're never going to find out in an interview. But it has absolute ramifications for the way that I interact with people.
But let's say I come to you and I want to work for you, and I come in and I knock one out of the park when it comes to the interview. I've done very well. You take a shining to me. Maybe you see something of myself in you, and you want to be a mentor to me. And then I take this test and I'm a disaster. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to work with that person? I mean, you see the potential, you see the grades. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to bring them along the path?
100%. Good question too. Let's say you show certain deficits. Well, due to the science of neuroplasticity, which came about 15, 20 years ago, it was always thought that IQ was something that you were born with, that you were given, that's fixed, and you can't do anything about it. That's what they try to tell me. But the whole science of neuroplasticity has demonstrated that the brain can actually regenerate itself and regenerate cells. So therefore, what you can do is that by training on specific elements that are also correlated to MFRI studies, you can improve your emotional quotient, your cognitive quotient, etc. So there's tremendous hope. The whole field is changing. You can actually grow and develop. You can actually stave off in older age, like me. You can start to stave off mental decline by practicing, and you can really evolve. There's never ever a situation where you can't evolve.
What about in personal relationships? And one of the reasons why I ask this is it's interesting. There's somebody I work for who I think is very good at tuning in, but has the ultimate poker face. I think I'm pretty good at reading expressions, like you starting to smile and that sort of thing, but this person gives you nothing. Mm-hmm. What about in personal relationships? How important is it? And what do you do with that person you can't read?
Yeah, very good question too. Personality types. You might say that person's inscrutable. Now, go back into that person's history, which you can't do because you're relating to somebody, and they may be reading you very well, but not showing you anything. First of all, it's got something to do with the way that they were brought up. Who were the models in their family, in their surrounding, in their milieu? Did they express emotions? Were the relationships with the people you're expressing emotions around you positive, negative? If actually somebody was close to you, but you don't want to necessarily reflect emotions because the culture says you can't do that. Let me give you an example. In fact, it goes back to where I came in earlier on. Japan is a society, right? Now, a very interesting experiment was done with Americans and Japanese students, and they were shown a movie of a grisly amputation. They were shown it, and they didn't know that cameras were focused on them. They exuded pretty much the same kind of grimacing and facial expressions between the cultures. However, when the scientist walked in to the room and showed them the film again, the Japanese didn't express emotions. They felt it, but they didn't express it, because in their culture at the time, to express emotions in front of higher authority was not allowed. So their emotions were suppressed. And I think it's got a lot to do with the environmental factors influencing you, what your personality is like. Very often introverted people aren't expressive. Extroverts tend to express and emote publicly. So not a simple answer, but ways of explaining it.
But a very good one. There's a global cognitive study too, isn't there?
There is. Yeah. We're doing a global cognitive study all over the world, different continents, to look at cognitive thinking, emotional thinking. We got involved with a group called ISEC, which is the largest student-driven body in the world. 5 continents, they had graduate students do all of this. So we're accumulating data all the time as to what people are like in terms of the cultures that they grow up in. Coming back to emotions, there are universal emotions. We have found, at Emotion-Wise, there's something like 20 universal emotions. Previously, they thought there were 6. And we've gone out and looked, and Dan Cordaro in particular has found that emotions are actually, there are certain patterns which are culturally specific. And there are also individually specific patterns. But there are 15, 18, 20 now that people even in, let's say, New Guinea, who've never seen television before, who're not used to photographs or Western culture, they can identify what those emotions are.
I had the opportunity to take the test, and can you walk us through the results and tell me what did you find with me?
You sure you want to do this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, all right.
Here are some of the questions that are encountered. Let's take a look at that first.
Okay. So now what we're doing, and I don't think you actually know this, but we're going to throw up some facial expressions and vocalizations to put you on the spot.
This is a girl in high school, and I've just asked her out.
Okay. Stand in line.
Disgust.
Disgust?
Well, I don't know. I guess this one's tough. It's not easy.
It's tough. I chose them to be tough, actually. Yeah. No, I would have one other go, and I'll tell you.
Just kind of, I'm superior to you.
Yeah, that's getting close. It's pride. It's an exaggerated pride. Okay. Yeah.
Well, now there goes mine.
Yeah, we're going to throw you. We're going to throw you a vocalization. Vocalizations are very important, by the way, because it's actually far more important than we realize. But nonetheless, what do you think the sound depicts?
Okay. Wow. That's a guy who just got home from work and he's just like sat down in the chair. He's like relaxing.
Yeah. Very, very, very close. You would say relief.
Right.
But in point of fact, it's complex. It's actually awe.
It's awe.
Can we play that again? And you'll hear it.
Wow.
Okay. See? Right. Next
there
one.
goes my pride again.
2 out of 2.
Just disgust. Just like, ugh.
You got it in one. Disgust is one of the 6 universal emotions that a researcher, Paul Ekman, found. And that's one of them. You just got that. You nailed it. Okay.
I'm one for 3, I guess.
Right.
Do we have any more?
I think we've got 6 in all if we're going to go through them.
Here comes sound again. Somebody just hit their thumb with a hammer.
And you would call it?
Pain.
Correct. You're doing well. You're on the uptick. Okay.
I'm doing better.
Yeah.
Oh, this one's tough. I just, I don't know. This one's got me. You got me on this one.
Sadness.
Sadness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's really, you see the dripping lips, etc.
Yep, yep.
All right, let's do one more if we've got a vocalization.
That's surprise?
Yes.
Oh, it was right?
Yes.
Oh, phew.
But you know, you were at disadvantage here because you didn't have labels to put on those expressions, okay? Because when you did the emotions assessment, the game,
right,
you had emotions to choose from.
Right.
And actually, your results were pretty darn good. And I would have been surprised if they weren't, because you're in the job that you're in, and you've got to do all this emotional reading stuff. And I think you came out far superior than, you know, the average cohort, the average statistics that we have.
We've got the total score. We're going to throw it up on the screen because I'm very proud of it. So
okay,
this
is, you go. There you go. So Mike, let me explain this to you, shall I? Okay, your total score there was 75%. The average for this from thousands, tens of thousands of people around the world is 62%. So your emotional literacy is really far superior. It's made up of a combination of recognizing positive emotions, negative emotions, and even neutral emotions. It's also made up of your vocalizations that you actually responded to and you measured. We measured that, as well as the facial expressions. So all in all, I think that was a great result. And let's break that down a little more and show you what that means. So essentially, we're looking at your emotion type, and we're looking at the positive emotions. Now there, you were fantastic. You scored 82%. You recognize positivity in a very advanced way. You're amongst, you know, really near the top of that. You're almost equal, if you like, to the average score of negative emotions. That's interesting from your point of view, and I'll tell you why. People who tend to score highly on recognizing negative emotions, they tend to experience a lot more negative emotions in their environment and in their milieu. Which, I don't know your personal circumstances or how you grew up or where you grew up, but nonetheless, it's not heavily involved in the way that you've lived your life in many respects.
Wow, interesting.
And the neutral emotions you were 100% on. And that's fantastic because that's a combination of both positive and negative, and very hard to discern. And I guess, you know, being in the job that you are, you pick up all the nuances. You're very, very good at that. 100% result there.
You know, what's interesting is I've got one of those type A competitive personalities. So when I saw that I didn't score so high in the middle category, I was pretty mad about it. But now you're making me feel a lot better.
There you go.
We've got one more set of results. Let's take a look.
Okay. Okay, the stimulus type. So you were superior in both of these elements. You were better than our average in terms of recognizing facial expressions. You were very much better in terms of recognizing sounds, vocalizations. So all in all, that's a pretty darn good result. And it would have surprised me if you didn't get something like that score.
Well, it was a great discussion. Thank you very much for coming in.
Well, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure for me too.
When we come back, happiness is an important component of emotional well-being, but if you're not as happy as you'd like to be, perhaps you can blame it on your address.